You've probably sat in an airplane before, maybe tucked away by the window or squeezed in the middle seat, half dozing as the hum of the engines rocked you into monotony. But imagine this. Imagine sitting there, half bored and scrolling through, your phone at cruising altitude, when suddenly the world tilts, quite literally, and every pilot of a state-of-the-art F-35 fighter jet outside your commercial plane pivots, adjusts, and salutes, all because of one unassuming passenger in economy. Seat 12F. That's not the kind of scene you'd expect to happen in real life, right? But the truth is stranger than fiction. And what happened that day in the clouds rewrote the idea of anonymity for every person on board. At first, nobody paid her much attention. She had slipped into the seat quietly, a woman in her mid-30s, carrying nothing but a small black duffel bag and a half-worn leather jacket draped over her arm. Her hair was tied back tight, her eyes sharp, but there was nothing that screamed extraordinary about her. She looked like any other frequent flyer, maybe a consultant, maybe someone visiting family. No one knew that under that calm exterior was a call sign known to every combat-ready pilot in the world, a name that didn't just echo in war rooms and training grounds, but struck silence in the hearts of those who had once doubted her. And so, as the flight rolled into the clouds and passengers shuffled for drinks and headphones, history was preparing to collide with routine. You see, legends don't announce themselves with trumpets. They sit quietly in seat 12F until fate knocks at the window. The first hints that something unusual was unfolding came not from inside the cabin, but from the world outside those oval windows. A few passengers in the back noticed it first, tiny specks in the distance, darting like swift birds cutting across the pale sky. At 36,000 feet, most travelers never even bother to glance outside. The view is often the same blend of clouds, endless blue, and the occasional shimmer of sunlight bouncing off the wing. But those specks grew larger, darker, and closer, and soon their outlines sharpened into the sleek, dagger-shaped profiles of F-35 Lightning II fighter jets, slicing through the air with military precision. The murmur began slowly. A child pointing, a man craning his neck, the inevitable clatter of phone cameras rising like an orchestra of clicks and beeps. Why were military jets shadowing a commercial airliner? Was this an emergency? A threat? No one knew. But in seat 12F, the woman shifted slightly, straightening her posture, her fingers instinctively brushing the inside of her jacket as if she were reaching for a familiar comfort that wasn't there. Her gaze remained locked on the glass, unblinking, calm in a way that unsettled even those who dared glance at her. Then came the moment that turned whispers into silence. The jets formed up alongside the plane, their cockpits visible, and one by one, the F-35 pilots raised their gloved hands in a crisp salute toward the very seat she occupied. It wasn't a salute to the aircraft, nor to the crew, nor to any flag painted on the tail fin. It was to her. Passengers blinked in disbelief, eyes darting from the soldiers in the sky to the quiet figure in 12F, who until then had been just another stranger with a boarding pass. A teenager gasped, a flight attendant froze mid-step, and a businessman muttered something about classified operations. The truth was clear. The woman's call sign had been recognized, her presence known, and in that instant, the skies themselves seemed to bend around her. She didn't move, didn't acknowledge the salutes, didn't even flinch, as if this ritual was as normal to her as fastening a seatbelt. For the rest of the passengers, however, it was a revelation. They were seated beside someone whose very identity carried weight enough to command the respect of some of the most powerful pilots in the world. Whispers spread like wildfire across the cabin, bouncing from row to row until nearly everyone was aware that something far beyond a routine flight was taking place. The businessman in 14C leaned forward, whispering to the woman in 13A, while a pair of college students unashamedly filmed with their phones, narrating in hushed tones about some secret agent or a hidden general. But the truth about Seat 12F wasn't born in the gossip of passengers. It had been carved into history years before, across deserts, oceans, and battlefields, where her call sign had been etched into radio chatter like a ghost story pilots told each other under starlit skies. Her name, though never spoken aloud on this flight, was one that had slipped through classified documents, whispered in NATO briefings, and echoed during tense standoffs. To the outside world, she was a nobody. To those in uniform, she was known as Spectre, a pilot who had once flown missions so dangerous, so unlikely to succeed, that her survival itself felt like myth. The salutes from the F-35s weren't just acknowledgments of rank. They were acknowledgments of survival, of respect earned in places few civilians could even imagine. And yet, here she was, pressed into the same narrow economy-class seat as everyone else, sipping lukewarm water and staring straight ahead as though the entire ceremony outside were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. The irony wasn't lost on her. Years ago, she had flown alongside some of the very jets now hovering in formation, her voice sharp through headsets, her commands decisive, her instincts saving not just herself, but countless others. And now, the world had moved on, or so she had thought. But history has a way of pulling its ghosts back into the spotlight, even when they try to vanish into anonymity. For the rest of the flight, passengers sat in stunned silence, occasionally sneaking glances at her, some with awe, others with fear, all wondering the same thing. What kind of person commands such recognition in the middle of nowhere, 36,000 feet above the earth? To her, the answer was complicated. She was no hero, no saint, just someone who had been asked to do the impossible again and again until the impossible became routine. Yet here, in the hum of recycled cabin air, her past refused to let her remain invisible, and the skies themselves seemed to demand that everyone aboard remember who sat in seat 12F. The flight attendants, usually unshakable in their calm professionalism, were visibly rattled. One of them, a young man in his 20s, tried to keep his smile steady as he leaned down to whisper to her. "Ma'am, is everything okay? Do you know them?" His voice betrayed the quiver of someone who wanted to sound casual but couldn't, mask the weight of the question. She didn't respond immediately, just turned her head slowly, eyes locking on him in a way that sent a shiver through his chest. Not unkind, not hostile, but intense. The way a person looks when they've lived. Through storms no words could capture. After a moment she spoke softly, barely above the hum of the engines. "I know them." That was all. No further explanation, no bravado. Just 3 words that hung in the air heavier than any turbulence. Around her, passengers leaned in, hungry, for context. But she returned to her silence, eyes drifting back to the horizon outside. What no one in that cabin realized was that years earlier, she had been the tip of the spear in missions so critical that maps had been rewritten, lives had been altered, and international standoffs had dissolved under the quiet pressure of her skill. Her call sign, Spectre, had come not because she was invisible, but because she always returned when logic said she shouldn't. In war zones, radios had crackled with her name like a lifeline, and in training halls, rookies had spoken it in reverence, as though summoning a ghost who embodied survival itself. The F-35 pilots outside weren't saluting a former officer. They were saluting a legend whose shadow had shaped their own careers. And for the first time in years, she felt the gravity of it pressing down on her chest, not because she craved recognition, but because anonymity had been her refuge, her escape from the weight of expectations that nearly crushed her. The longer the jets held formation, the more the passengers inside realized that they were witnesses to something historic. Something that would never make the news yet would be retold in hushed voices at family dinners and office break rooms for decades to come. A teenager whispered to his father, "Dad, is she, like, famous?" The father, unable to answer, just stared with the same mix of confusion and awe etched on everyone else's face. Meanwhile, she closed her eyes briefly, memories washing over her. Not medals, not ceremonies, but the faces of those who hadn't made it back. The ghosts who sat beside her every time she boarded a plane. To the world, she was a call sign. To herself, she was a reminder of the price of survival. And here, in seat 12F, she bore it quietly, while the skies reminded her that legends never really disappear. The formation outside finally began to shift, the F-35s breaking off in pairs, their sleek silhouettes vanishing into the horizon one by one, but not before the lead jet dipped its nose in a final gesture of honor. Inside the cabin, silence reigned, broken only by the occasional gasp of a child or the rapid tapping of fingers recording everything they could. The passengers didn't cheer, didn't clap. This wasn't a spectacle for entertainment. It was something far more solemn, something that demanded reverence. The woman in seat 12F remained motionless, her expression unreadable, though in her eyes there flickered a storm of memories that no one around her could begin to imagine. She thought of the long nights in briefing rooms with maps spread across tables, of missions launched under the cover of darkness, of radio calls that began with hope and ended in static. She thought of the weight of responsibility, of the decisions that had saved thousands but haunted her every time she closed her eyes. She wasn't supposed to be here anymore. Not in the sky, not in the shadow of jets that carried her legacy forward. She had chosen a quieter life, one without uniforms or call signs. But fate has a cruel way of reminding you who you are, even when you try to bury it beneath ordinary routines like boarding passes and cramped economy seats. As the plane continued on its route, the murmurs inside grew into a tapestry of theories. Was she a general? A spy? A war hero? The truth, of course, none of them would ever know. To them, she would remain the mysterious figure in 12F, the woman, who turned a routine flight into a story that would ripple far beyond the confines of this aluminum tube in the sky. To the pilots, though, she was more than that. She was the embodiment of a legacy they carried forward every time they strapped themselves into their cockpits. And to herself, she was simply Spectre, a survivor who knew that legends are not born from glory, but from sacrifice. When the seatbelt sign finally chimed and the flight attendants moved through the aisles again, life on board returned to a strange, fragile normalcy. But nobody forgot. Not the teenager who would tell this story for the rest of his life, not the businessman who would swear he'd been in the presence of someone untouchable, and certainly not the woman in 12F, who closed her eyes and leaned back against the headrest, listening to the steady hum of engines, carrying the weight of her past like a secret folded neatly into the lining of her jacket. She did not smile. She did not frown. She simply sat, the ghost of a soldier in the body of a traveler, knowing that even in anonymity the skies would always remember her name.